The production of this video was made possible by donors to the Orchestration Online Patreon initiative. Please consider adding your support to the creation of free educational internet resources by visiting our Patreon page linked below. Hey there, this is your orchestration tutor Thomas Goss, bringing you the D group of website evaluation entries. And this is just so exciting. This is actually my second group of entries that I'm going to be evaluating today. It is a sunny, beautiful September day here in New Zealand. Actually, September is our late winter, early spring. And it's New Zealand Father's Day, which is the date that it is. It is celebrated early September rather than in June, as in North America. And I am celebrating by evaluating even more scores because this is just so much fun. And later on, I'll take a walk and do some fun stuff with the family. But right now, I'm focusing on you and your scores. Now, I noticed somebody had posted a time stamp for the different entries in these videos. And I'm not going to take it down, but I just want... I think that the last thing that I would really want to see with these group evaluation videos is for people just to jump to one or another particular person's evaluation. I mean, the timestamp could be useful for just jumping to different musical tracks and just listening to different mock-ups that introduce each evaluation. But I sort of feel that ultimately, you know, that it kind of goes against what I'm trying to do here. I would really like all of the entrants, everybody who contributed a score to this particular particular group of scores, to watch the entire video and to comment supportively on one another's efforts, even if it's just a word of encouragement, right? You don't have to be an expert in orchestration. You don't have to offer something that is a learned opinion. It is enough to just to talk about what you liked and what you didn't like from your own perspective, right? Or to tell them if you learned something from what they did. Okay, so with that said, let's jump into Christian's score. And I really loved the kind of rolling, rollicking kind of a sound that you get at this slower tempo and with the kind of gestures and rhythmic elements that are being employed here. Now, having said that, I think that there are some things that cannot be sustained at that slower tempo, like for instance, these tambourine rolls just feel very they just feel a little bit too paced, and certain things like longer notes, background pads, things like that, they don't really quite lend themselves to the slower tempo. They have a tendency to sort of pull at the energy, at the momentum to kind of slow things down a little bit. I commented on some of this earlier in the previous evaluations for the C group. There were one or two scores that had that same kind of inertia. So I think to combat that, you really need to come up a bit in tempo. So if 160 is too fast, then maybe like 144, right, would be a good compromise. So just experiment with that, Christian, and see what you think. One other observation, just in general, for people to bookmark for later on, and that is that this, like the reference staff for the piano part, can just be eliminated. Okay, just pardon my clogged throat. I just ate a bit of emergency chocolate. So yeah, you can just delete this, and then it gives you more vertical space in your score. Maybe you can also bring up the size of the note heads as well. You know, just like increase the staff size so that things are more readable in this format. So, with that introduction, let's discuss the criteria. I'm just going to move some things on my desk around because I forgot to do that, that I had rearranged things after breakfast, so I have to move them back here. So a lot of what is done here in Christian scoring addresses some of those problems. Pitch weight in the upper middle register of the piano, I feel that is sufficiently addressed. The issue of thematic material possibly sounding too repetitive if it's scored exactly the same way each time, that is more of an issue. So the general nature of this, though, the kind of the big, slower, more deliberate kind of dancey scoring kind of ameliorates that concern. And you have these little touches right in here. I think that really helps a lot. It's one of the loudest instruments in the orchestra, right? So things like that really do help to keep things from sounding too repetitive. Then we've got the whole question of the melodic development. And here I think you did something really beautiful here with the triplets. And this is something that you're able to do at this slower speed, right? So I think if you went faster than 144, this wouldn't come off very well. But this works pretty good. You're keeping your strings playing nothing but accompaniment, right? So they can't help out to moderate the tone of what's going on in here. But you're sort of piling on the winds. You're doing clarinet and oboe in octaves, and then you've got an octave above that, the line of flutes overlapping into piccolo, and then dropping down an octave to the same level as the oboes and so on with the first and second flutes. Yeah, so I mean, you did some very careful work on this score. I appreciate you writing in atu, adue in the right places and so on. Just really paying attention to a lot of those scoring concerns, marking 2 and 3 on the lower trumpets, and then saving the lip of your first player for this da 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 da. I think that's very heroic and well scored out. So you had a very beautifully deliberate approach about taking things to a higher place and working in the accompaniment into that approach, and then providing support from below by trombones and clarinets. So I think that works really nicely. Now, talking about the whole concern of the accompaniment figures themselves, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of this you could do to sort of integrate the parts. Like, some parts could be trading off with others, but there's certainly at this tempo, there is nothing that is all that unlikely with any of these instruments. One thing that I will scold you a little bit about, Christian, is forgetting to put the alto clef back after you had scored out your violas, right? Because it just looks really strange to have these low E's in treble clef. And there's certainly nothing about this that could not be scored in alto clef. That is really the right kind of position for this kind of scoring. So the accompaniment works out pretty well, and I like some of this stuff in the background. With the way that you have scored, you balance some of these things. The horn pad is not quite as interrupting of the momentum as I have commented in the previous group, right? Where there were a couple of scores where the background pad I felt was kind of dragging, was sort of pulling back a little bit on the momentum. As I feel this is right in here. The at this tempo, the tambourine just seems like it is pointing out how slow the music is right here, right? So maybe a little faster, 144. You still get the triplets. You still get that big, nice rolling sound, but this will be less draggy, okay? And then that will also solve some of the problem possible in here. I don't feel it's as big of a concern, but it is still a little bit of a concern. I mean, notice like there's another discussion alongside all of this in terms of foreground and background textures, which is really like a Samuel Adler thing. He was really that was one of the focuses of his orchestration training. What's the foreground? What's the background? How do you indicate those with dynamics? How do you score them just naturally into the instruments and their ranges and strong registers and so on? So, here you just really kind of blatantly have your melody mezzo forte and your accompaniment piano and so on. I'm not so sure that the accompaniment here needs to be piano, and what's going on with the castanets here, right? I mean, we've got our castanets still playing fortissimo, right? I mean, that just feels jarring, right? Maybe you could drop down to mezzo forte. And in fact, I don't feel that there's any reason why the pizzicato couldn't also be mezzo forte, right? So if you have your pizzicato mezzo forte, same as here, and keep your horns piano, then that will do a lot to prevent them from dragging down on the energy. Especially when you've got this big kind of raspberry right in here. This is yet another concern that is that is unlikely. Like this is such a slow, like at 120, you are taking a full second. One tick of the second hand on the clock to go from this note to that note, and that doesn't seem like a whole lot, but it is really a lot. It would be better at this tempo to score this on the last beat of the bar, right? And that would give you more motion, right? Rather than it just really is a long. It just feels like forever in terms of how long that is taking. And anyways, I've spoken before about how I like the way that this ends by leading into the downbeat right in here and supporting the melody as it goes as it does its upsweep. So that's all good. And I love the way that it continues on rather than just stopping, right? So there is some integration of these kinds of things. So to that degree, you see, I'm giving you a bit of a break on the repetition of these two parts, right? They hang together, and you have enough unique elements, right? Like we got here. I would say don't throw in mutes. There isn't enough time. They would have to hang mutes from the beginning, right? Say hang mute, right, and then that gives them a couple of beats at the slower tempo. Not, it's still a bit of an ask. But then you say open, right? Okay, so I would say like open kind of begs the question of whether or not it was closed, right, rather than muted. So I would say just forget about worrying about hanging mutes and just have this closed, right? You get a similar sound, not the same sound at all, but you get enough that is similar behind these other instruments that it doesn't make the hugest amount of difference. I really love the stuff going on here in the lower brass and in the basses, and I also like this rhythm that you've set up with the bassoons and the violas. This very bolero-like rhythm, dun, 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 dun. I think that's really propulsive, and of course these these little figures in the clarinets. I think that's really effective, really great scoring, and very much in the character, the kind of splashy cinematic character of certain kinds of scoring that evokes the Spanish flavor, Spanish culture. That is not to say that it is truly Spanish orchestration, but it is very much in the style of what we perceive to be that, and especially in a cinematic way. So if you're a film composer or if you intend to score for film, I think that you are on to something here. And just like I think your ear is good for capturing certain elements of style and certain gestures that that are more familiar, in a broader sense, right? Like, if you want like really culturally, like some of the most culturally honest and not, I don't want to say cliche, but not but less familiar, less obvious kinds of scoring that I've ever heard is the Falla harpsichord concerto, in terms of like sounding really authentic to the music of that region. That is like one of the most amazing and sometimes chilling, suspenseful works. So check out the harpsichord concerto. But this is just really, I just really love the big, bold way that you communicate this. This is so great. And then right in here, just throwing in the brass, that solves the whole problem of of there being a certain kind of relentless quality to that, if it weren't answered already by how broad the scope of your orchestration is previously. And then we get into that yep up 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 up. And once again, just to point out, it has been pointed out that there was an error in the template, that some of these notes here are, I scored out as a guide for you, are inaccurate. And please don't get hung up in that, okay? It's sort of sucks all the joy out of this for me when people get kind of stuck on those errors. And it's fine to point them out. I don't have a problem with that, but to just kind of, it doesn't really, this is not about getting one or two notes wrong in the template. This is about focusing on how I can help you improve as an orchestrator, okay? So that's all I'm going to say about it, and let's just stay focused on that. And once again, I really love the considerate way that you are thinking about the voices, right? First trumpet, like when you're sharing one staff with three voices, right? Three individual players, and then the like right here, you could have just had a bar rest to indicate the third player taking a break. And I think you could just say 1, 2 up here, and then leave off those the third voice's rest, or second voice, third player's rest. Now, the balance is a little weird here, because you're starting off mezzo forte, molto marcato. By the time you get to here, it'll be forte or even molto forte, and everybody else is kind of coming in around the trumpet players. So right in here, I mean, it sounds silly to say it, but you heard it here first. The trombones are going to be overpowered. Okay. I can't believe that I just said that in public. But yes, the trombones are going to be overpowered right in here, because your trumpet players are already going to be forte here, and this is going to be piano. And then how big do you want this to be? You're saying mezzo forte here. So that implies that these other parts are never going to get much bigger than mezzo forte, and your trumpets are going to be very loud, like forte and, as I said, or bigger. So the balance here is just a little strange. I don't think it would hurt anything if they were all doing a crescendo from mezzo forte to, say, forte or molto forte in the middle there, and this was marked forte in the bass trombone part. I think that that would balance perfectly fine. And then, this could start off piano and then crescendo to what? You have to tell us right here so that it balances with the rest of the parts, right? I think just, even if you leave this as it is, you need to tell us how big this is getting, right? So if these players are playing mezzo forte and they're pushing into something right in here, the other players are going to want to follow that. They're going to want to crescendo at the same rate. So if you want to keep them in the background, you need to tell us, right? Okay. So other than that, I don't have too many other issues. I think that this is just a really fun score. There may be one or two little things that I missed. Please point that out if you see it, viewers. And otherwise, I'm just going to say that this is a great start to this group of evaluations. And thank you so much, Christian, for sending me your score. I really appreciate the opportunity that I have to look at it and give you some feedback and help you out if you need the help. Right? So now let's see what the second score is like. And that is just one of the funnest scores I have looked at all week. There's so much innovation and little cool ideas, and in the previous entry, or I was talking a little bit about like our perceived idea of a Spanish flavor to scoring, and then scoring that was a little bit more true to the culture, folk culture, and the kind of the cultural milieu. And I would say that this is closer to that. Not to judge one as being better or worse than the other, but just to say that there is a lot of color in this, and touches, and kind of a sense, sort of a knowing sense about certain gestures that I find very compelling and very authentic. Now, having said that, I'm not saying that everything in this score works. And probably people will have noticed right away that even though everything is marked forte here, and the harp is marked fortissimo, you just can't hear the harp. And no amount of wishful thinking is going to make any difference to that. Now, you can hear the harp here in these glissandi. That works great. But I would say, Albert, that you need to reimagine what is possible to be audible on harp, right? So things like this, that you've got the harmonics from below supporting the plucked notes from above. For this kind of scoring, you would and even the celesta chords right in here that also get buried, you would really need everybody else to be piano, right? Or mezzo piano. Just the harp is just not going to come through in this kind of scoring. The glissando, of course, is different. If you were to use big rolls, that would be different. If you were to use very interesting figuration above the massed sound of the rest of the orchestra, and the pitches were a little bit lower and a little softer, then the harp would come through. But the way that you got it scored, even though it's a very beautiful idea, it's just a wonder. Some really great ideas of what is possible here. It just is not quite going to work with this mass of sound, right? So you could go ahead and just take the harp out in these first 8 bars, and then just increase the dynamic to fortissimo if you want to, right? But I mean, having said that, there are some fixes that you could have. Like, for instance, right in here, you could definitely bring down the volume quite a bit, and maybe that would help out with the celesta, right? But maybe it would be better to score this, like just the right hand of this celesta part, onto a glockenspiel, and then you would get a similar effect. You would get sounds that came through, or perhaps like a keyboard glock, like the jeu de timbre, right? That would, you could score some of this onto the jeu de timbre. It's not exactly the same technique as a celesta, but it's close. So, yeah, but like some really cool stuff in here: triangle, castanets, tambour de basque, and the cymbals, and right in here, I like the kind of little rhythms that you throw in from time to time, and of course this sort of sweep up to this emphasis here twice. That works really well. Now, those are some general scoring comments. Now let's talk about the evaluation criteria. So as far as the pitch weight being in the upper middle register of the orchestra, well, you really do stick to that. You know, you take Falla at his word, and you pretty much stay in that upper register for, pretty much the first 16 bars of the piece. So, I mean, that's not to say that that is wrong, but it's just that is a concern that I have about the long-term listenability of any piece that you score, right? If the original composer has scored it in piano and has really has limited to the upper middle register the way that this is, can that be sustained, right? And I will say that you do a lot to sustain it, and that feeds into the other criteria of the thematic material repeating, often possibly sounding repetitive if it's orchestrated the same way throughout, and so on. Now, you don't do that. So, like, you are reusing some of your approach previously, right? But it's not identical at all. You even have like a lot of added things, these emphases in the middle, this different scoring in the strings, which I think is so welcome. And especially these trills, they just are devastatingly effective. The trills in the English horn and the bassoons, and that is going to be very bustly because you've got three double reed instruments that have fairly big reeds on the same pitches. This is a little strange. You've got an accent at both ends of a tie. I think you just forgot to take the accent off of this end of the tie. All right. So anyway, so you're going to have triple double reeds, lower double reeds, playing right on that same thing, and then playing this little line in here. Now, just a word of caution. Any time that you double up or triple up higher bassoons, right, and up in the tenor register, it is a very rough sound. It is a kind of a coarse, yelping kind of a sound. Now, here I just talked about how this score has a more authentic approach, or it brings to mind certain kind of folk elements to me very strongly. And if that is the case and the intention, then that is what you are going to achieve by having, Atu bassoons and English horn all playing together. There's this rule of three where, you combine three different elements and they turn into something different. But that doesn't quite apply here because two of these are bassoons, right? And then you're adding the English horn, and it's kind of more of the same. So it's more of a thickening agent, right? And so you get that kind of hoarser kind of a sound, which I think is great. It's very, very cool in this context. Just being aware, especially with the trill, right? The accented trill, that is going to be something that is very prominent in the music. Now, this is very cool. You have your third clarinet on E flat, right? And that is so much fun. And it just has this beautiful bright sound right in here. And this leads into our third concern with our evaluation criteria, and that is the treatment of the soaring melody, right? Just how high does it go? And this is rather effective, really. The idea of the two flutes, or this one solo flute. I think actually A2 would be better. Keep it A2 because here you're thickening it up. If you leave it as one solo flute, then it'll be really audible when the piccolo comes in. You'll feel the thickening, and especially with the oboe from below. But if it's A2, then when you add the piccolo to it, there won't be any noticeable, there won't be that sudden feeling that it's thicker. All right. So just being aware that these pitches right in here are really kind of weak on the piccolo. Kind of anything below D in the staff is quite a bit weaker. So yeah, see, like this is much more effective. This is much, this higher, brighter sound right in here in terms of competing in a bigger texture. But when things get big and thick, if you just want a little bit of extra thickening from your piccolo, that's fine, but it really isn't contributing very much. And especially this this kind of scooping upwards grace note right in here. It also kind of affects the attack, the incisiveness of the piccolo, or detracts from it. See, this is much better. I would say this biom 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 biom. I think because like the accent is really going to be on the higher pitch, right? Whereas right in here it's bum bum bum, and it's like the E is one of the weakest notes on the piccolo, right? That's the concern. All right, and then the melody reaching upwards, soaring upwards, that's all dealt with pretty nicely right in here. All the different little compromises to make it work, and once again, a couple of devastating trills. This trill is amazing, but this one is the best of all. If you got rid of all the other trills for some reason, that would be fine, but don't get rid of this one because this one is so... it is so calculated and so sinister. There's that slightly sinister quality to Spanish music, right? When we get, like, when we're dealing with music that is written in Phrygian and so on. That half step and that kind of feeling of uncertainty, right? The suspense is built right into the scale. Now, here you drop your piccolo clarinet just, into more of a supporting role, right? So it's doubling with the first oboe. And, that's all right. You're sort of changing the color of the upper part of the melodic curve, and that's fine. So, right in here, we're leading to the whole question of the upper middle register feeling relentless if it is allowed to continue on. So, to address that, I talked a little bit about how the extreme variety of color that you're using and innovation prevents it from feeling too repetitive, right? Because just you're keeping... And also between these two parts right here, the bars 5 through 8 and 13 through 16 are different enough, right? There's some attempts right in here with the harp to get some interesting stuff, but it's just not audible, and the celesta won't be all that audible either. So, if you're giving if you're giving any kind of accompaniment figure to the celesta in a way that you feel would be effective, then this is not the place to do it, right? Like it's more effective to just add more going on in your violins, your pizzicato violins right in here. Which here you got another thing. You want to pluck the harmonic, but plucked natural harmonics on violin are just really not very loud. Once again, they're as soft as harp or softer, right? And you've got them competing against everything else. So this is not going to come through as well as you think, right? Okay, but yeah, in terms of accompaniment style, I felt that's something that you could have expanded on a little bit in the strings both times and not left it to the celesta to really do anything, because it's not really doing anything in terms of audibility. All right, so yeah, see, if this were rolled and if the pitches were higher, excuse me, sorry, I'm pointing at the wrong part. If this were a bigger, fuller rolled chord, I meant to say, then you would have a chance of being heard against this big chord right in here. Now, here you've written out all of the notes of your glissando, and then you sort of write them out again. And I feel this is completely unnecessary, right? It's better to do this. Just do this the first time. The harpist can read it. You could provide a little pedal diagram right here that just, the not the box, but the line with the little blocks on it. I think it just would immediately tell the player exactly how their pedals should be set for the glissando, and then they do it. That's the one thing that I've heard. Some harpists. Some harpists like the diagram, some harpists like the alphabet version, but most harpists I've seen prefer the diagram just for glissandos, just to quickly set the pedal. And also, like at the top of the page or near a very important rehearsal mark that they're going to have to jump back to in rehearsal and just set their pedals really quickly. So yeah, so this is really fun right in here. We're kind of coming back to that whole issue of, whether or not this feels too relentless staying high. And yeah, maybe a little. It might be a good place to bring in lower pitches. Just add an octave below your bassoons, or make the bassoons play in octaves by adding the octave note below. Same thing down here. Maybe throw in the cellos, doubling the lower bassoons, just to bring a bigger scope into your scoring. And then this is so nice right in here. These harmonized thirds. That really feels true to me. That feels very true to Falla, as something that he might have done himself. And yeah, and then this, bum 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 bum. And and notice, like, I see that you have not followed my error, so good on you. I could have claimed that little mistake that I put into the template was to see if anybody was paying attention, but no, it was, it was, all of this stuff is done around all of my other projects. It is miraculous that there are not more mistakes in a score of around 100 bars that has some really complex layouts for this kind of engraving and Sibelius and everything else that I have to do around, working on a ton of other things over the course of a year, right? So I'm actually already doing the score layouts for next year's score evaluation just for fun, in the odd little half hour or hour that I have free that I kind of don't have the energy to do any other kind of little thing. I'll fit that in and just enjoy myself with it, because I find scoring things out to be really enjoyable, actually. Yeah, okay, so when you come to the end of a stopped horn part, then write in the circle, right? Like this. Just to let the player know that the stopped part has come to an end, right? Because sometimes composers are just not clear. So, I don't know what else I could say about this except that I just really, really loved it. And I think that this driving staccato here looks like it's going to transition to something really interesting, right? So, look, Albert, if you if you really want to take some of this further, I'm happy to look at a longer orchestration by you in next year's evaluations if you feel like supporting on Patreon. I mean, if you're going to put in this quality of work and this sort of level of fascination and innovation and all that other kind of stuff, then, maybe it's worth it. But, if it's not, it's fine. I'm not pressuring anybody to do anything. I see orchestrators contributing more, and I see orchestrators having really great ideas that it would be interesting to see what they did next and so on. So, that's just something to say that I would love to see more from you in the future, and please consider participating in next year's orchestration challenge, because it's a completely different direction, and yet I think that you would have some interesting ideas. So with that, let's move on to the next score in this round. Another great score, this time from Eli, and it's really great to get a score from you this year, Eli. I think that this is a really good challenge to bring out your particular interests and strengths as an orchestrator, and let's just jump straight to one of the funnest parts. I'm going to come back to this later, but I just want to mention one little thing in here, and that is I love the way that the xylophone is used as an accompaniment element rather than as a melodic element. I feel that adds so much to the pointiness of how this pizzicato accompaniment works, and of course with alongside the clarinet staccato doubling. That's just such a cool idea. And I also love the way that the first trumpet comes in here muted, and that varies the difference between these two sections. One little scoring note, and that is hard stick or not, cymbal parts in concert music should not use X heads if it's on its own staff. Crossover scoring, like if you're scoring a drum kit or maybe a shared staff that is similar to a drum kit, there might be some call for an X note head, but I think in this case you just do not need it. The player understands that it is a cymbal because it says cymbal at the beginning of the part, right? So you don't need any kind of fancy note head. So that I think I heard somebody commenting or read somebody's comment that that Dorico was using X note heads as a default for all cymbal parts. So I don't know if that's true or not, but Dorico designers fix that, because that for concert music, whoever set up that default should know better. All right, that's the default for concert music is just a standard note head. All right, so let's talk about a few things here. Okay. So pitch weight in the upper middle register of the piano with no pitches below middle C until the end of the passage. Okay. All right. So you redeem yourself in one stroke right here. Boom. Okay. So that is like the minimum amount of seriously below middle C scoring that you could possibly get away with and satisfy my criterion for that particular part, and I think that it works fine. So like just with that one stroke, boom, hearing these low B's and everything else, I hereby dub this passed on that criterion. All right. So now, as far as the thematic material repeating often and possibly sounding repetitive, it is a bit of an issue here. perhaps there's some strengthening that you could do here more than just throwing in the bassoons and the cellos. Some element to the music you could have added that would make it stand out as not just so much a copy paste of the first four bars, right? Now, once again, this is like a really subjective, a really subjective judgment, and it is completely mine to make. And I am not saying that something is better or worse because it didn't pass that particular, it didn't tick that box, right? I'm just talking about concerns that I have as an orchestrator, right? So how well does something line up with it? Sometimes things that don't line up with it but work anyways are instructive, right? So just the energy here. I noticed that you've scored this a little faster than my template and a little slower than pianists play it, which is about 66 rather than 63. And I think it works. I think that's just about as fast as I would ever want this to be played. It still feels a little too fast to me, at least for orchestra. I might actually play this on the piano at 63 rather than 66. All right, so in terms of these, like the response, the responding bars, you solve that beautifully by the different use of the horn and as I mentioned before, the muted trumpet, and then of course it changes anyways all on its own. And that leads us to the third issue, which is the melodic development soaring quite high. And I thought that this was very cool, is that you just trade off to piccolo for a bar, right? And then that's all it needed to do. And on to the next thing. And now here, this is actually somewhat devious, and maybe we're not aware of this, but you're using the sound of the muted trumpet right in here in combination with the oboes. That in turn, that they sort of supplement each other's overtones. That in turn pushes on the flutes, which push on the piccolo, right? So both slots above the trumpet in its body of tone, and the oboes as well, they push on their own second and fourth overtones, which are exactly those positions in the octaves, right? So throwing this in, the piccolo is just an aspect of those overtones to the trumpet, right? So when it stops, it makes perfect sense. And then this continuing on with the piccolo once again coming in just to dovetail off of the end of the flutes, and the flutes dropping to a more reasonable register, leading towards this E at the end. So yeah, that all makes total sense. Nicely done, right? And then all the doubling and everything in here, that's all really well balanced and has a very nice color. Okay, so no complaints from me about that. Okay, now the accompaniment figures, I've already heaped some praise on this because of the way that the xylophone was used as an accompanying instrument, and of course the doubling in the clarinets. If there were any instrument that could cover all of those notes in that register, then it certainly would be the clarinets, with the least amount of problems of change of register and so on, weak to strong or strong to weak, rich to thin, and so on. And then, of course, along with the pizzicato, it just all makes perfect sense. And then these little touches here from the horns, they're great. They don't slow things down. They don't pull at the energy. And then, just in general, this background here, sitting on these B's, that works great. That doesn't drag things down either. All right, so heading straight into here. Upper middle register continuing on, relentless if no textural contrast to previous passage. Well, I mean, there is some textural contrast, and there isn't, right? It's very similar orchestration strategy, right? We've got, if we're looking at firsts on top, and then firsts and seconds in octaves, and then the violas in the octave below. Here we have the first and the seconds in octaves, and so on. So there's a lot of similarities. And then, of course, like doubling in the oboes and the flutes and so on. So I mean, Yeah, if this were an assignment that were graded, I would give you a pass on it for other reasons. One is because of some different strategically placed notes in other instruments, but that is in the music itself, right? So, and then also like for throwing in these horns right in here with these chords, and this is like this has less of a scrubbing kind of a feel. I was commenting on the like dropping these notes right here too low. They kind of have this sort of kind of sound. Sort of reminds me of somebody scrubbing things on a washboard. And certainly that sort of feeling is right here in the viola and cello, the kind of feeling, but it is not as kind of up and down. So it avoids some of that. All right, so it's all redeemed in this one big hammer blow right here, right? And that kicks off the last passage, maintaining the driving staccato, transitioning smoothly to the next passage. It really feels as if there is a passage that could follow this, that you're thinking ahead to it, and that what you would have scored would be a workable passage, right? So that it ticks that box too. So, like just in strict terms of the evaluation criteria, no real huge problems. Even though because it sort of has a different, it solves those problems by ignoring them in some ways that sort of solve them in other ways, right? So, and just like all the different little touches make up for what might otherwise be a little bit more, feeling more repetitive, more higher pitched in the orchestra than it needed to. That like I mentioned before, the xylophone, the muted trumpet, and some other kinds of things. The skill with which or the foresight with which you scored this right in here. Just a lot of those things are nice craft issues, right? And I really love the accompaniment of the clarinets, and then trading off to the bassoons right in here, along with the strings. I think that will give you a very, very kind of a cutting feeling to that marcato. So yeah, this is great. So just really, really enjoyed this score. So that is all I have to say about it. But we are halfway through this set of evaluations, but I still feel like I could do another 9. But I'll just limit it to 3 so I don't completely lose my voice for tomorrow. So let's take a look at what the next score in this group looks like. All right, and now for Gordon's score. So as you could hear, pretty intensely, thickly orchestrated at times, at other places, a few issues with how the melody is treated. So I am not going to be too particular about the evaluation criteria. I think it's probably better for me and more useful for Gordon to discuss certain principles of orchestration and balance and texture and so on and so forth. I think that would be the most helpful thing. All right. So just to go through the criteria very quickly, pitch weight in the middle register of the orchestra, not a big issue. You have spread things across the orchestra pretty nicely. The thematic material repeating, often you thicken up the texture and you do other things and you have other strategies, so that's not an issue. The melodic development soaring pretty high. You jump to piccolo right in here and throw that in, and I'll have some more to say about this, but you are compensating in really nice ways. The accompaniment figures crossing kind of a wide range is not as much of an issue because you kind of don't use them here at the beginning. And then here, like in the kind of echoing section, they're not really used either. So yeah, so that's not really a criterion that is all that, has that much relevance. Now, as to this part right in here, like here's where the whole question of upper middle register continuing on, textural contrast, etc. That's not as much of an issue. It's a different kind of concern that we've got now. And then driving staccato, transitioning smoothly to the next passage. You actually give us a bit of the next passage as you would have scored it as an example, and I feel that it does lead into it very nicely. Okay? So, jumping back to the first page, let me see how I can help you with this. All right? Just in terms of the overall scoring philosophy, approach, etc. Now, you're going to start hearing a few little lawn care noises outside. I think somebody has just started mowing their lawn, and there may be one or two shouts of excitement from an adjoining room from our resident Minecraft expert who is sort of tracking down something right now with his buddies on Discord. Right now, New Zealand is in a lockdown, so everybody is just doing nothing but yard work and staying home and hanging out, playing games on Discord and stuff like that. So apologies for that. I'm just going to work through it. I don't think it is going to make that much of a difference, and you probably won't notice it except for when I stop talking, like just then. So let's talk about the treatment of the melody and the context of the accompaniment right in here. Okay? So right away, you're kind of setting yourself a problem by having the trumpet an octave below the oboe, right? And there's some compensation right in here because you've got this stuff built around it in your strings. So you have this, shum, 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 shum. And these sixths are really easy to play, and so are the little grace notes going into them. So this does not need to be divisi at all. I could totally play that. That would take very little time for me to study and so on. Okay, but the problem really still remains that the oboes are much less strong than the trumpet, and the trumpet is actually quite strong. And there's the added problem that the oboes are going up to their thinner register, and even though they have a harder sound because they're odd two, which isn't the most pleasant oboe sound, by the way, it just has a very, very hard cutting sound. They're going all the way up to this G. Okay, so that's you're really pushing your oboes fairly high for what is the ultimate destination of this score, right? Would it be a reading with your local orchestra and stuff? So you're going to send your players up there who are going to be pretty much sight reading to a very high note that has no doubling by strings or anything like that. So like pushing oboes up to F, sometimes even G, and so on and so forth. That's fine if it is a solo that is really worth their while and they have a chance to really work on it and practice, and it is something that is like career building, kind of like the opening oboe solo of Daphnis and Chloe by Ravel. Right, I've actually did an entire video on that. However, just kind of as a throwaway line, an octave above the trumpets, it's very problematic, I would say, just on its own. It's playable, but it's it's like not the most beautifully musical thing. And this is the register where the flute is at its best. It's just, the flute could play that all day long and be a really good complement to the trumpet below. But as it is, oboes get thinner as they get higher, right? So you have this thinner sound right when the trumpet is starting to get stronger and stronger. Now here, this is great. You're throwing in the piccolo an octave above the oboes. That's a very nice, bright sound. And then you're having your oboes double the trumpet, and that's fine. And then here they go into octaves, so you have this triple octave. And I think that that's very powerful. I think this is pretty good. Right, but like there's kind of no support for the melody from the strings. There aren't, and here's another thing. Don't tell the string players how to bow their parts, right? So this is just a throwaway. In fact, if I were playing this, if I were the concert master, I've been concert master of a school orchestra. If I were bowing this, I would probably go down bow, down bow, down bow, down bow, up, down, 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 up, and then this would just be down, up, down, up, down, up, right, down, up, up. So this right in here, you put an up bow mark on it, so that already, right, is losing you friends in the violin section, in the violin groups of the string section. And this is all fine right in here, but we're kind of losing that sort of nimble hopping around sound that comes from the pianist's accompaniment, right? Then the sort of left hand. So it ends. You end up with kind of a more solid kind of energy here. Right? It's just like really, it's kind of more of a minuet energy, like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, sort of just kind of almost like a slow shuffle, right? Rather than that kind of hopping, right? That more kind of, as I said, nimble. I'm overusing the word nimble. I apologize, right? Okay, and then we're coming back in here. We have a similar strategy. Now you're having, this is kind of strange. You have this trade-off. You have 2 trumpets. Then you trade off to the second taking over. I guess you're giving your first a chance to take a breath. Then you have 2 trumpets, very, very powerful sound, plus the second oboe, right? And then an octave below, you've got bassoons. And I'm wondering why you just left them out. And the second, because look here, you're creating a fifth, right? You've got E and B stuck together. So where did it go? Maybe you just forgot to put it in there. But it's important to the overall structure of this. And then right in here, you're coming in with the flute, and you're just kind of giving over to the trumpet and the flutes. With your oboes, you're giving them a chance to have a breath. I think that's kind of cool. They probably don't need it as much as you think, but they're appreciated if you do give it to them. So we've got, I think you intend to have 1 flute and 1 piccolo here, and then 2 oboes, 2 clarinets, 2 bassoons. So, I mean, this all works fine, but just as you might have heard me talk about in the previous evaluations, is that the piccolo is very weak below D in the staff. So, maybe you're thickening this up a little bit, but it kind of ultimately makes very little difference in the long run when you've got your oboe doubling that, which is 2 to 3 times as strong as the piccolo in this register, and then the overtones from the trumpet are also as strong, if not stronger, than the piccolo, right? So it's a bit of a waste. It might have been better for you to score for 2 flutes and 1 piccolo, and then just double this, right? Just have this A2 right in here, and then you'd have a thicker upper sound right in there. Now, jumping to this next screen, we have some more of the same problem with the piccolo, right? We've got the piccolo doubling the flutes, and it doesn't really come into its own till around E, D or E. And I mean, Tchaikovsky did this too. Like, he would double the first flute and the piccolo and stuff, and then the piccolo would become stronger as things rose upwards, and then the flute would drop. So, I mean, I'm not saying that it doesn't work, right? But it's just that the piccolo is kind of wasted, right? Like, the place to bring in the piccolo is right here on this D. And then it does combine with the sound and make it worth it. But I mean, in another sense, to also be really fair about this, bringing in the piccolo and allowing them to warm their chops up before they go up to this high E is also kind of nice for the player, right? It doesn't really make a big difference or any difference to the sound with these oboes and the trumpet from below. But I mean, it's not hugely wrong. I'm not saying that it's wrong. It's just not necessarily needed, right? So adding the oboe right in here, but then as soon as you drop out with a trumpet, this really becomes a lot less strong. So I mean, I see what you want to do here is you want to make things more powerful pushing upwards, but really the thing to do when you've got this much weight on this lower line, and then the oboes are coming in A2. They cannot possibly provide the same amount of weight going forwards as the trumpet had before, right? And I see what you want to do here. You want to go to a more harmonic roll for the trumpet, and that's fine. However, you do need to supplement the fact that this line has lost its strength. So I would say probably the best thing to do is just throw in some clarinet, and then you can have the clarinet drop out, or just continue on upwards if you want to. But maybe have the clarinet run up like this, and then just jump down and grab the like double the bassoon, or do some other kind of roll, and then just drop down to this written F sharp. That might be one way of kind of compensating in there for losing the trumpet. And I would say A2 clarinets possibly. So yeah, and then once again we don't have that nimble accompaniment, so it really is more of a kind of a static sort of a feel. You've got this da 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 idea, and then it looks like it's heading to like a kind of a bolero sort of rhythm, except that this is just repeated 16th notes. Okay, so here you got a roll in your timpani, and it's done in 16th notes. So like you can really hear it. It's da 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 da, and it just really has a mechanical kind of a sound. I think you intend for these to be triple beams, right? So it's unmeasured staccato. Excuse me. Unmeasured tremolo. So, brrr, right, like it has that purring sound, right? Not just the repeated 16ths. So, I mean, if you intended the 16ths, then fine, that, I mean, it'll still work, but like I said, it's just very paced, and it's just very easy to tell where the timpanist is on any given note that you stop them on, how louder or much softer or louder the previous note was, right? That's the problem in a roll, especially with crescendo, right? Is just every step along the way is very, very plain to see or hear. So I would recommend, like, if you really insist on 16th notes here, I would still recommend that you go to 32nd note beams here and have an unmeasured tremolo. Now, just in general, I don't want to sound like a broken record. Actually, I do. It's really fun. No, actually, I don't want to sound like a broken record in recommending to people that they check out Note Performer as a more realistic interpreter of of the sound of the orchestra, as if we're doing mock-ups and things like that. And sometimes, I'm listening to some of these mock-ups, and there are problems in the orchestration that the mock-up is actually showing the listener. It's like saying, hey, this doesn't work here, and this is why. And you can hear that the balance is off, and Note Performer is faithfully telling you that very thing. But then there are other times when Note Performer does not tell you that something is out of balance. That's rarer, actually. But, I mean, at least I think there are more hits than misses in that particular, in the terms of balance and proportion with Note Performer. I find it really a great tool. Of course, it's not an end in itself. It's like you wouldn't want to just use it as your final product. I just use it as a reference and as a useful one in things like this, these challenges and so on. But I would never want to recommend that for any final product. I would say, if you really wanted to do virtual orchestration, then I've heard some really beautiful virtual orchestrations that come really close to the real thing, actually. And if that, you can be artistic with those. You just have to have an artistic approach to the way that you use them. You can't just count on them to do the job for you, right? Okay, so back to the orchestration here. We've reached the point at which we have that other criterion, the upper middle register continuing on, relentless of no textural contrast. This is just not an issue. Maintaining the driving staccato, so we addressed that earlier. So just like, how is the passage realized, though? Bum 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 da 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 dum, and we have this sort of internal, this kind of internal harmonization right in here from our from our strings, right? Kind of sort of playing those inside pitches. I don't know if it's quite the thing to throw, like to turn this into octaves, right? It's the whole idea of going B C B. There actually isn't a B at the end of the phrase, this upward phrase right in here. Okay, maybe it would be better to sort of leave out, just like to have the strings come to an end here, right? And just leave out these lower pitches, some of the lower pitches, right? And then have everybody come in on the second beat more, right? So like some things you're gonna need your first beat for, like finishing the roll, like this E right in here, possibly the clarinet right in here, maybe or maybe not. But you probably don't need the lower strings right in there and so on. Maybe just the cellos to double the timpani. Yeah, and then you've got this kind of intense harmonization right here in the middle. The trumpets, the horns. We've got these octaves here in the bassoons and so on. It's a very kind of blocky kind of sound that you've got with the sound sets that you've got now. It's just another reason why I'm sort of like recommending trying out Note Performer, which is pretty cheap and very light on RAM. And this is like I think that like if you were to hear it more clearly, you could see where there might be problems, right? Just maybe a lot of weight here in the middle. Especially with the brass and some of the lower strings. There's a reason why Falla scores this in the upper middle register of the piano, right? So maybe like having lower notes is not a problem, but having so many and having so much focus and weight on them is potentially a problem. Then we've got the treatment of the melody going forwards. Like here, you've got your piccolo going very, just very low, and I just feel anything past this D is basically superfluous. It just really kind of doesn't make any difference, especially not jumping back up to this D here, right? And it's sort of a different kind of relentlessness at issue here, right? You have the treatment of the melody in the trumpet, oboe, and flute family, and then you continue on clarinet and flute family, and then you continue on oboe and flute family and clarinets and the strings lower, right? So I just feel that like the relentlessness that we're dealing with here is more just that the same kinds of sounds being used for everything, right, in the melody. So that possibly is something that you might want to adjust just long term. But I do. Having said that, I do think it's really cool having this unison right in here. So, maybe if the strings were playing the melody in here and giving the winds a rest, you could come back in here fresh again with your winds, and then the strings doing this very cool idea of this really strong unison. Of course, like that takes away, like you didn't throw in the harmony line, right? So there are some bits and pieces missing from this that that were in the original piano score that I feel would make your score a lot stronger because their functions are so important, right? You threw in a lot of simpler functions here and there to sort of make up for the fact that some of the original functions were maybe not working in the way that you envision this, right? But I'm not sure that those simpler functions are making the music as lively and as passionate and as and ultimately as convincing, right? So just watch out for that. Okay, so that's all I've got to say on this, but I really, thank you so much for sending in this score and having me evaluate it. I felt it like, sometimes I run into a score that I feel brings out the best in me as a teacher and as a mentor and so on. And this is definitely one of those scores. So I just really appreciate that opportunity. And I'm so interested to hear what you might have to contribute to next year's orchestration challenge. So thanks so much. And now let's continue on to the fifth score in this set of evaluations. Very tasty, Juan. I mean, tasty as in full of flavor, right? Just such a satisfying, fulfilling kind of approach. And thank you so much for showing us how close in conception and possible realization this score was to Nights in the Gardens of Spain, which is something that Falla started working on when he completed this set. So this would have been very fresh in his mind. I feel that he was like when he wrote the four Spanish pieces. He was thinking of Albéniz and about how he had like created these piano suites that evoked different regions of Spain, and certainly, to a degree, the four Spanish pieces are really based on some of Albéniz's work, and that not to say imitating them, but like in terms of the form of bringing to mind a different region, in terms of the dance styles and the color and other kinds of little musical cues. And then, of course, that translates into this apotheosis from there into Nights in the Gardens of Spain, right? So like this really has a lot of touches from Nights in the Gardens of Spain in it, right? Okay, that is not to say that everything works. However, I'm hoping that I'll be able to give you some guidance and have some of this make more sense to you. So there are such cool touches in here. I love the G natural and the G sharp clashing together in the pizzicato here. I would say the way to deal with this is to have the natural sign in parentheses. Now, I know that seems like you are delegitimizing the natural sign, but it is bringing attention to the first player that, hey, this is natural for a reason. It's not putting parentheses around the natural sign to say, maybe this is natural, maybe it isn't, or it's not that important that it's natural. It is more to say that, this is, by the way, this is something that is important to the music. And then, they can just see the sharp and then the natural and so on going forwards. So, because this will definitely get raised hands at rehearsal if the concertmaster isn't paying attention to the string parts when they do the bowing and so on. Now, what is possibly not working here is the inclusion of the harp the way that it's scored, right? So here you have this, very quick harp scoring kind of supplementing what's going on in the piano. And it is just going to get buried by the force of the piano, the xylophone, the emphasis of the pizzicato, the sforzando pizzicato is just going to, all by itself, has got more weight of tone than the harp will ever have in that area. Now, if the harp were to do a big roll, then you could hear it beautifully, right? But it just, the way it is just this abrupt pow. It is not going to come through. So big roll would work. Just a brief chord is not going to be as effective. Then right in here, the harp is playing a lot of the same pitches as the pizzicato strings, and the pizzicato strings are just so much stronger than the harp that it is as if the harp is just not going to be there. Now here in this glissando, the glissando is fine. The idea of the glissando is fine. However, you're not covering enough strings, right? Now, if you were to isolate this part in Sibelius and then just hit play, hit Y and then hit play, then you would sort of hear the problem right away. It's just, you're going, right? And you need to go, right? You need to have a glissando that is a real sweep. And that means that you have to cover more ground, right? So you have to cover twice as much ground. I would say have your destination note in your glissando like down here, right? Just this lower B down here. And then you'll really hear that glissando coming out beautifully against everything else. As it is now, As I talked about before, is sometimes note performer telling you what really is happening and what is not happening. What note performer is telling you here is the truth, that glissando is going to be more or less invisible the way that it is scored because of the way everything else is using that same area. However, a wider glissando is going to cover more notes and it's going to be more loud notes as you push into the crescendo. However, look, you have got fortissimo crescendo, right? So this is close to triple F right in here. And then you've got all these other parts, fortissimo crescendo, and you're telling your harpist, hey, forte, by the way. So why is that? Like, what, what is giving you the idea that the harp is loud enough to be heard at the beginning, right? So I think you want it to sort of arise out of the music, but everybody is so strong already that you need to start at fortissimo, at least fortissimo crescendo, and you don't have to mark the destination dynamic. Just that'll be good enough. And then once again, this doesn't quite work against the impact of the other parts. So that was me sort of picking apart things that I sort of had an issue with, in terms of the harp and so on. I really do like the way that things are scored, though. Don't get me wrong. I love the trills right here in your oboe part, your first oboe part. I like the fact that there's enough independence between your oboe parts and clarinet parts that they get their own staves. This is one place where I totally approve of that. I think that it just would be tricky scoring it another way. That's fine, and you don't have a huge stack of instruments to deal with, so that's fine. You got this real high C here, but of course you've got fortissimo crescendo, so it's going to be fine. It's not a very musical note on C flute, but it is, you can pop those out. That's not a big deal. At least you didn't make them play these Ds, right? And this is kind of nice. These, this little double tonguing in here. Tucka, 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 tucka. That's real fun. Throwing in just a touch of xylophone right in here to accompany the piano. That's all great. Now, what I thought was really effective, though, was this right in here. The glissando on the xylophone leading to a very easy-to-hear piano chord, right? Just using the xylophone for the glissando to the piano. That's great. That is a great idea, Juan. So now let's just kind of let's open up our criteria, right? Thematic material, repeating, possibly sounding repetitive. I don't think that is as much of an issue, even though that is kind of the approach here. You're adding a few little elements lower down, and so on. More bassoon, and it's but like the innovation of the solo part kind of covers some of that, right? But still something you might want to think about if you take this further and really just decide to create like a full-scale Nights in the Gardens of Spain sort of score out of the entire suite. Think about varying these, maybe starting off a little less huge at the beginning and then adding more huge elements than you have here, right? So that it really is emphatic, right? It's almost like it's an exaltation of what you started with, right? And this can lead forward into it with more impact. Okay, that's one possible kind of thing. Now, the melodic development leading kind of high. We already talked about that a little bit. Your flutes and piccolo and so on. And then, of course, with the piano right in here, it just solves all problems immediately because the piano can go anywhere with the same amount of force. It has no problems, right? Now, let's jump ahead to see how you echo this, which it's interesting that this is the more interesting part, right? The reaction is the more interesting part. And part of that is, of course, it's bigger. You have these triplets, which I think work really beautifully well, and this kind of bolero, this stuttering kind of backwards bolero rhythm here, da 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 done. That's really cool. Turning the page, we kind of see a little bit more of the same. Similar approach as to before. The glissando sweep up there. But like you hold off on the piano, right, and you have xylophone and winds and so on in there, and that is nice, refreshing kind of approach. But of course, the harp is going to be invisible in here. It just really cannot contribute much meaningful. Right now, this glissando is hugely effective right in here. Looks like this line got a little unattached. That is something that, if anybody is watching this who works for the development team of Sibelius, you really need to have magnetic glissando lines, and glissando lines that can cross staves. It has been 21 years since I bought my first version of Sibelius, and of course there was a version before that. So it's been over 2 decades. You need to work this out, okay? If you can have what is to all intents and purposes a magnetic slur line, you can have a magnetic glissando line. Okay. Now, I think that right in here, despite the fact that this is just doubling the piano, it is really the the piccolo, that is at the disadvantage here. It would be far better to have the flute play this part right in here, and then have the piccolo join in right in here. And then just like jump down, as you might have seen in other arrangements. Sorry, this is like my 11th evaluation of the day, and I've been going long on these. I'm just going to take a drink of water. So, and there starts the weed whacking outside again. So please bear with me. Okay, so yeah, accompaniment figures, sticking to our criterion, the upper middle register stuff, the bum bum ba da 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 dum. I think that this is handled really nicely right in here, and just like these responding chords on the second beat, that's just so much like Nights in the Gardens of Spain. Really well done. And now here, one more word about this glissando. One of the problems is that you don't cover enough ground in such a short amount of space, right? So if you were to start in the bass register and just have one big sweeping glissando, you don't have to have 2 octaves in this. It doesn't really make a huge amount of difference playing against all these other instruments, right? So just have one big sweeping glissando that covers a lot of ground in this amount of time. Then you will hear the glissando. Once again, it's very hard to hear the glissando with the way that this is scored. I'm just going to take a quick look at the mix, see if you turned the harp down for any reason. Yeah, see, look at how low the harp is, right? I mean, why did the harp get turned down? Maybe it was annoying you? Anyway, so just respect the fact that the harp is one of the quietest instruments in the orchestra, and it just needs as much help as it can. Otherwise, it's just kind of a waste to score a bunch of things for it that nobody can hear, right? Now, this is really interesting towards the end. How the strings come in, and then you have them thickened up by the winds towards the end. That is a cool idea. And that, then all the doubling all the way through. I feel that this is leading to something that you could score a bit more, but I think that, in terms of the whole question of transitioning, I get the feeling that if you were going to continue on scoring this in the style of Nights in the Gardens of Spain, as you started, you would probably be thinking more about transitioning to something that the pianist would be doing almost like as a featured solo, right? So it is not necessarily setting that up exactly the right way right in here. So, a little bit more room for improvement in there, perhaps. And then, this is okay, just there's no contrast between the different kinds of the timbral quality of the of the instruments, right? You've got your strings, your first violins supported by flutes with the piccolo above, and yeah, it's going to be very, very cutting right in there. That high piccolo sound becoming less so, and then just suddenly dropping off when you get to here, right? So that drop off is going to be felt. So, just I know it's like it's hard to think about like what else do I use, right? But you've got this piano at your disposal, What if you went winds and strings, yeah, da, 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 and then answered by the piano, yeah, ba, 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 bum, and then answered by the winds and the strings once again, yeah, da, 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 right? So I mean, there's a few different ways to play this where you're supplying a little bit of variety, and it isn't just all about winds, like the upper winds and the upper winds and strings all the time, right? Anyway. But once again, just such a compelling score and so much fun. And this has really got me jazzed. As you can hear, my voice is kind of running out. If it weren't for that, I would be doing more evaluations every day. But I've got to save a little bit for hanging out with my family today on this New Zealand Father's Day. I'm still getting used to that. And, after 20 years and 12 of being a dad here. In addition to my stepkids in the United States. So I will just leave you with that, Juan, and just, once again, really enjoyable score. Just had tons of fun looking at it and giving you feedback on it. And there were so many other things that I could say about it, but I'm going to leave that to people in the comments. If there are any ways they feel that you could improve this, or any things you might have thought of or might not have thought of, they might point out. In a supportive way. It will all be really interesting to read on my own, right? So thanks again for being part of this. Thanks to everybody so far. And now for the very last score for this collection of website entries. What a great way to finish off this set of evaluations with this powerful score by Magnus. And yeah, just so exciting, so much fun, and so many different ideas being used. And, for ticking a lot of boxes, unticking some others in my evaluation criteria. Just a few notes while they're fresh in my mind. One is, this is a very effective glissando here on harp, but you don't need to write in all of the notes. All you need is a beginning point, an end point, a line that says glissando. See, like here you have two different styles of glissando. You're saying glissando, bracket, and then the curvy, wavy line. So just write in, write the first note, the last note, the glissando line, and then provide a diagram for the harpist, and then they will just fill in the notes, and they don't need to actually read each one. Okay. Another thing about this is that there is a lot of symbol, and I know that is not a real orchestral sounding symbol, and I mean, come on, note performer. This is something like that should have been addressed from the very beginning of people adding sound sets, even at the most basic level, to Sibelius and to other notation software programs, and the development of Note Performer and so on. We orchestrators do not want a crash cymbal sound for our clash cymbals, our cymbal pair, right? That is not what we want. We want a real honest sound of two 16 to 20 inch dishes crashing together. Okay, that is what we want. And we don't want just that. We want it to be We want it to be programmed into the sound set that we can ask for different sizes. We can ask for different mallets hitting them. And, we can have whooshes and we can have scrapes and we want all that other stuff. That is what we want. And that is like that is the baseline. So if anybody out there is listening to me from Note Performer or from Sibelius or Dorico or any other application that has got its own native instruments built into it, we want a better cymbal sounds. All right, and we want it to be very easy to use, to ask for some of those things. Okay, so that is part of the issue here, Magnus, with your score, that it just becomes, with the way that Note Performer is interpreting it, it just starts to sound really repetitive. Now, even if it were just a regular cymbal player, a live cymbal player, I think it would still sound kind of repetitive. Okay, now one thing is, I just really don't feel that this is necessary. However long you want your cymbals to last is how long this note should be, right? So if you want cymbals that last for 2 beats, then write in a half note, right? Don't just throw in this little thing, because that could mean anything, right? It could be to the end of the bar. Or it could mean, the player could just interpret it to damp it on the 2nd beat or on the 8th beat, right? Yeah, so like I think you really should indicate how long you want it to last, okay? And I just think that's a baseline. So I would say cymbals half as much as you've got, and they would be twice as effective. Do you know what I mean? Like, the less you hear something that is that effective, that is that much in the sound picture, I think the more striking the effect is. Now, I mean, what is it? Peter Gabriel, his Melting Face album has no cymbals on it, right? So, like, what is in the place of that mid-range? There is no emphasis of a splash or a crash. There is no timekeeping with the hi-hats, right? So how does the drummer use up their time? Well, you just have to go listen to that album to see, right? But, music can be really effective without cymbals, right? So I'm less convinced by this, like, the change of the emphasis to the 2nd beat right in here. I'm not so sure that worked for me, okay, just in terms of the emphasis. But I do like the idea of damping. That's another thing. I mean, we can't have a damped cymbal. That's like the most common sound. That's the most common thing you could do to a cymbal. Just have it last for, a very short amount of time. So, anyways, sorry to unleash the gripes. But it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart to have, to see scores from, 165 people, and, with many of them limited to the cymbal sound from sound sets that are, just based on thinking that is 20 years old. I mean, what is this? I mean, we are in the 21st century. Come on now. Come on, everybody. I'm not saying that you guys are bad. I'm just saying we can do better, right? We can tell that to yourselves out there, Note Performer developers, Sibelius Sounds, all you people listening to this. You can do better. Let's do better. Okay? Let's have a really nice cymbal sound being the standard from now on. Okay? All right. So I'll get off my soapbox now. All right. So here we've got... let's apply some of these criteria. Obviously, pitch weight in the upper middle register of the piano is not an issue here. Okay, the thematic material repeating in the same way, well, you change around some things. You have bassoons here, and then you've got horns here, right? So, you've got sort of, the boom, boom, boom. They've got that emphasis right in there rather than the bassoons kind of hammering away down here. Bum, 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 bum. So, I mean, there's a little bit of difference. Could be a little bit more, right? So, if you were going to make this into a bigger arrangement, and you never know, Magnus, I mean, you could be talking to, some, some director of a local orchestra, and they're saying, "Wow, I wish, you could be sharing a pint at the bar or something like that, or just talking at a cafe," and he would be saying, "Oh, Nights in the Gardens of Spain, wow, that was just the greatest work. I wish there was another orchestral work like that by Defia, but he only, wrote half a dozen that I can program." And you say, "Well, I did an arrangement for the 2021 orchestration challenge." Oh yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah, how did yours go? Well, I just really enjoyed it a lot. Well, do you have more? Can you score out like a whole movement? I mean, you can get deep in with these conversations with conductors, these imaginary conversations over, you know, over a latte and a muffin at Starbucks, at an imaginary Starbucks. So, so think about like this being more of a permanent work, and like what you could do to vary the sections so that they don't feel too, I mean, that they build on one another. It's like not to say don't do exactly the same thing twice, meaning don't do anything the same way twice, right? But just think of how you could add variety or strength or some other kind of thing that makes these echoes feel magnified, right? Okay, then right in here we've got something that is so cool, and that is a resonance with a previous evaluation. The idea of using the xylophone as part of the accompaniment style. Here you'll notice that the mix is really pushing the xylophone forward, and much more so than it did in that previous evaluation. So I don't think that that is as much of an issue. It isn't sounding right in the mock-up. It's just sounding very prominent. But I think that is just a temporary thing, and I think that especially if some of these pizzicato pitches were doubled by, say, oboe, English horn, that kind of thing, I think that you would have a better balance with the xylophone if that's what you want. So that kind of takes us to a discussion of the melodic development, sort of the treatment of the melody. Yum, 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 da, 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 just throwing in a little piccolo. And here I'm not going to gripe too much about the piccolo being in a weak register, below D, because you are warming it up so that it will take off and play this little octave duet with your second clarinet player. So this should be your first clarinet player, right? You want your, if you're, there is nothing wrong with having this note followed by this note, okay? So just leave your second player on the bottom on these written C sharps and Ds, and then have your first player jump down to because like this, you've already got this doubling here with this pitch in the piccolo, right? So you don't really have to worry about a disjointed feeling with the first clarinet just jumping down, right? It is going to be fine. And that is actually a lovely sound, a slightly unsettling sound to have the clarinet double at the octave with piccolo in scoring. Now, what's really unsettling is to have the clarinet 2 octaves below the piccolo. But I don't think that it really applies in this particular instance. Okay, but it is nice and powerful, like the way that you've got it scored here. What I hope you'll change to first clarinet will be nice and strong and will just really do what it needs to do and not get overwhelmed by all the other stuff going on around it. Now, of course, you've got all of this doubled by other elements. You've got your violas coming in here on the same line as the clarinets, and then the first violins coming in, and so on. So if this is really, really powerful, it can start to absorb some of the sound of the piccolo, but not too much. Like once the piccolo gets above the staff, then you are kind of, it is not as much as a worry as you may imagine. Okay, and then then we have the echo here, yum 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 da 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 da, pretty much the same thing as before. Da 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 da. Now here you have, once again, you're giving your second players a lot of opportunities here, and I would just say the same thing. You can slur down from this B to this C and just have the first player take it over, and that's who I would trust here, right? And that's what they would be expecting to do, right? That's their job, is to lead their wind group. And I really appreciate that you left out the any melodic roll of the xylophone to the end here. I think that is the right decision to make. And then, with the glissando right in there, that's all fine. This is kind of strange. Yeah, pizzicato divisi. So this is all supposed to be pizzicato, and you've got staccato marked on it. Okay, so you should refer back to my list of 12 common scoring errors, right? And this is one of them, staccato on pizzicato. There's kind of nothing about this that is necessarily requires this to be, to be all that short, to have that abrupt sound, right? Yeah, and I mean, then you've got half notes and stuff. So I think you forgot to change over to arco somewhere. Did you mean this to be pizzicato and then arco, yet pizzicato, arco, yet and then maybe going to pizzicato here or something like that? But I mean, like this music is not going fast enough for these half notes to be scored in pizzicato in your second violins and violas, maybe in your cellos and double basses. All right, and then up. So I think you need to work out what you are doing there, whether it's arco or pizzicato. I think actually arco works better for me. Maybe like what if it were arco for everybody most of the time, but when you had this big hit at the beginning, it was divisi snap pizzicato in the lower strings. So snap, right, and then that gives the snap is enough of a pizzicato sound, even though this is being played arco, right? And so it just feels like the whole string section is snapping there. So go snap, and then snap, 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 and then go back to just regular pizzicato in your in the double basses, and then arco for everybody else, right? And then the same approach. I mean, that's one way of dealing with that problem, but it just seems a little unclear with so many staccatos, with half notes, accents, and scoring that really seems that it is more centered around arco playing. Right? It just feels like that is what you are trying to do here. Okay, so that leads us to the upper middle register, and here you've chosen to score like it's a little strange, and then accented but soft, subito piano, but with accents, right? So what if you just held off on the accents until here, right? Because otherwise you'd kind of get a bit of a mezzo forte. Everybody is just really getting antsy. They're anticipating this, and especially the people who were just playing fortissimo before, they're going to see an accent on a piano. And unless the conductor just really hushes them down, they're going to feel like they need to play more forcefully, right? Because you've got an accent marked on there. So I would say okay, here's another thing, that you've got these ties, right? These ties, so that's what makes me feel like you don't mean for this to continue to be pizzicato, right? Because you kind of don't need a tie on a pizzicato. I mean, like I think in that tip that I've got about the staccato and pizzicato, and I also have one on note durations in pizzicato, and sometimes like to clarify tying into a note, but you don't really need that here, right? You just need pluck, 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 and then rest, and then pluck on this, right? Okay, I won't get hung up in that, but I would say cut the accents until you get back to the forte section, okay? So, right? It's just too many accents right in here. And pretty big scoring. Not bad. I like this in the tuba. This line here in the tuba, bassoons. Right here, I think you could have written out a separate third trombone part and made it a bass trombone part, and that's just so much easier for all of this low stuff. I mean, yeah. I mean, a regular tenor trombone player could play it, but you want the weight down there, right, of the bass trombone. Yeah, I mean, So it's big full scoring. So I mean, look, I mean, if you just really want your accents here, then just start off forte and don't worry about this push, right? And you got this is kind of fun right in here, the way that this is scored. The flutes get really low in here, and they just be kind of like by the time you get down to here, like the second flute is going to be pretty much invisible against the second clarinet, and then as the first flute descends down to the middle of the staff, it's going to become invisible too against the clarinet. So unless this were very soft, like say everybody was playing piano or mezzo piano, then you could hear the instruments balance, but they're just not going to balance the way that they are. If you want more support for the clarinet part in there, I'd say you already have it with your strings. Whether this is considered to be pizzicato or not. But if you really want more of a wind sound there, I would say give it to just do this same exact approach, but in oboe, right? And then or you could have you could continue on with this second line here if you give that second line to the English horn. So you could have first oboe on the top line and then English horn on the lower line, and then that would be a fatter sound. Of course, you wouldn't get that kind of fluty sound, right? So anyway, look, there's a ton more to say about this, but I can't go on forever. So I just will say, Magnus, that think about coming back to this, or maybe applying some of the suggestions that I had to future projects that you do in scoring. And thank you so much for being part of this, and thanks to everybody so far who has participated. If you really appreciate what I'm doing here, the best way to thank me, the best way to show that appreciation is to comment on the other scores of the participants in your group, right? And maybe I should say this at the beginning of the video, because I don't know who has stuck around to the end of the video to say this after a couple of hours. But really, that is what makes it worth it to me. Like, there's nothing more disheartening for me to release a video and have nobody comment on it, no likes on Facebook, no reaction on Twitter, nothing, right? Like that vacuum, that makes me, I'll be in the middle of one of these challenges and I'll run into that and I'll just feel like, oh, geez, why am I doing this, right? So I've been I've felt very, very good so far, because, just about all of these videos that I've released, there have been quite a few comments, and things are starting to tail off now a little bit as people are starting to realize I'm going to have to release, in order to get this done in 8 weeks, I'm going to have to be doing a ton of evaluations every day and releasing them the next day. And so that means that people are going to be kept busy, but I mean, so what, right? There are 6 people who have, who were evaluated in this video. If each of those people left a comment for each of the other people, right? A separate comment, that's 30 comments, right? So, I mean, that's the level of interaction I would love to see on these videos. The more people comment, the more people interact, the more of a guarantee that is that I will continue to do it, that I will be back next year with more to offer, with more evaluations for people, for free out there. What is my price for people, for website subscribers? It's just the hope that you will comment supportively on other people's videos. And by that, I don't mean pretend that you are an expert at it if you're not. But just to, even just like encouragement, just to say, wow, I felt that was pretty good for your first score, or saying wow, I'd love to see you orchestrate this, or I really liked the way that you used E flat clarinet here, things like that. That just really makes a difference to me, and it makes a difference to the person you're talking to. Okay, so I cannot say this enough. Please comment on each other's efforts. Okay, it is a great way to thank me, and is something nice. Think of that as a nice little Father's Day present for me here in New Zealand. So thanks everybody. Just so lovely to look at all your scores, and I'll be back with the semi-brev evaluations tomorrow. There'll be a few showing up, probably 3 a day for about, about 6 or 7 days. It's going to take a while to get through them because there were so many. So thanks, everybody, and I will see you all very, very soon.